was the third explosion that rattled the house, and the doors and the windows were all shaking.
These clouds, it's almost like it was like nighttime, you know, it was just dark.
You could feel that in your chest and heat on your face from a half mile, so it was pretty big.
On December 30th, 2013, a catastrophic series of coincidences would result in two trains colliding, igniting hundreds of liters of crude oil, and it all happened to be captured on two onboard video cameras. But it's what the cameras didn't witness that led to this tragedy and put several locals and employees in harm's way. Castleton, North Dakota, a town that traces its origins to the Northern Pacific Railroad, named after George Washington Cass, the president of the railroad back in 1876, who established a station there at the time to develop a town for homesteaders. The Great Northern also had a presence in the town too to compete with the Northern Pacific. Today is a junction between the Burlington Northern, Santa Fe's, KO, and Jamestown subdivisions. It would also serve as the epicenter of a brutal collision and release of several tons of oil burning into the sky. On December 30th, 2013, BNSF grain train GRYLR-GT926A was traveling westbound, consisting of three locomotives, GE ES44C4s 6990 and 6833 on the head end, with 6745 as a rear train DPU. DPU being short for Distributed Power Unit, which would be remotely operated via radio inputs from the lead locomotive to counteract slack and act as an additional air compressor for braking. Sometimes they are used in place of traditional EOTs, basically acting as the marker, but it's not clear if that was the case on this train. Still, DPUs are common on large commodity trains like this anyway. All three are moving 112 hoppers loaded with grain, totaling out at 6,840 feet long and weighing 14,776 tons. The train sports a four-man crew today: an engineer, conductor, engineer trainee, and road foreman of engines, or RFE for short, conducting a check ride with the grain train crew, evaluating the trainee's performance. We'll refer to this train as 6990 West from now on. The crew went on duty at 12:15 p.m. at BNSF's Dilworth Yard in Dilworth, Minnesota, and were bound for Minot, North Dakota. Coming the opposite way was BNSF UFYN HAY405T, or simply BNSF 4934 East, as we'll refer to from now on. This train consisted of a traditional two-man crew of engineer Brian Thompson and conductor Pete Ripple. They had an identical layout of engines as 6990 West, being two up front and one DPU. However, the power on this train consisted of BNSF C44-9W 4934 and BNSF ES44AC 5958 up front, and ES44 C4 6684 as the rear DPU. 4934 East was classed as a key train, meaning it had a significant number of hazardous loads, usually 20 or more. In this case, it contained 104.111 tank cars in between two buffer cars, all loaded with crude oil. This made the train a total length of 6,536 feet and had a weight of 13,335 tons. Originating from the Great Northern Midstream Facility, or the Freiburg Rail Terminal in Freiburg, North Dakota, the train would travel just over 200 miles to Dilworth, Minnesota, with this crew before swapping out with another where the train would eventually reach its destination of Marquise Energy LLC in Haiti, Missouri. Both trains were about to pass each other that afternoon, with the 4934 East leaving the Jamestown subdivision to join the KO sub on Main 2, while the 6990 West was on Main 1, about to diverge onto the former Great Northern of the KO sub. According to interviews, the 6990 West was in the process of slowing down to eventually stop at the private crossing located at milepost 30 to disembark the road foreman as he was done his duties for the day, and a signal maintainer parked nearby watched the two trains pass to make sure everything was fine before continuing his work. But unknown to any of them, everything was about to be far from fine. As the signal maintainer watched the grain train pass, he noticed several switch heaters on CP Castleton were damaged by something. The culprit would turn out to be the grain train in front of him, as one of their cars, BNSF 486653, 45th in the consist, derails. The car drags the 43rd and 44th cars off the track, and eventually a total of 13 go on the ground, with the culprit car lying sideways on the right-of-way. The damage causes the 6990 to go into emergency, and then everything happened at once.
Signal maintainer, train going through Castleton. Anything go wrong with your train there? I just seen a bunch of stuff fly out the goods here.
Train in emergency, 4934 London.
You're all stopped. Yeah,
Not just saying emergency there on main 1. They're all stopped now, is that correct? And 4934 stop there. Yeah, main 4934, you got to stop there. We are everywhere.
there's a fire.
We're a key train. Yeah, that's mine out East Metro. It's emergency. We are everywhere. A key train. We are on fire. Which train is on fire there? Is that the 6990? 4934. 4934. We are derailed. We are all over. We gotta go. That's reportable. Okay, 4934 is on fire. Gotta go. All right, well, call me as soon as you can.
Despite the quick reaction and emergency brake application of 4934 East, they were powerless to prevent disaster, as the lead engine plows into the derailed hopper car, crumpling it like tinfoil. The impact knocks the lead unit off the track, taking the trailing unit, lead buffer car, and 21 tankers with it at 2:11 p.m. The two units surprisingly remained upright and by some miracle were propelled a short distance away from the logjam of tankers, which ignite into a massive fireball. Not wasting any time, the crew prepares to bail out. They try to go out the front door, away from the fire, but the impact had jammed it shut, forcing them to head out the back door in the direction of the blazing hell of spilled oil. They ran east down Main Track 2, away from the fire, with the engineer dialing 911.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
It's about a quarter-mile west of Castleton on the railroad tracks. We got a train that derailed and there's a fire.
Okay, a quarter-mile west of where?
That's for Castleton.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
I don't know. It's
Are you in Castleton?
Yes.
Okay, are you involved in this at all?
I'm part of the train crew.
You're part of the train crew? Do you know if anybody's injured? Do you have someone else on there? Do you know if there's anybody injured?
Nobody's injured at this point that we know of.
Later, after reaching a safe distance, the crew was picked up by a local passerby who took them to Castleton High School. There, the crew met the local sheriff at about 2:30 p.m. and informed him that they had hazardous loads in their train and urging him to evacuate people from the area.
And what do you have on board?
Ethanol.
You have ethanol?
Right. Loaded
Okay.
and empty. We're walking away from it. Looks like there's 2 trains. We're actually trying to figure it out yet.
2 trains?
As far as I know. Yep.
To which he obliged, with 1,500 people being evacuated from the area initially. Firefighters swarmed the scene to extinguish the post-crash fire, with local officers to keep the people away from the fire. As it burns, the grain train crew, after hearing word about the fire, hop off their power, meeting the BNSF employee that was supposed to pick up the road foreman. There they were joined by the assistant fire chief of the Castleton Fire Department, who asked for their aid by pulling a cut of unharmed tanker cars from the 4934 East away from the fire using the DPU. Upon receiving the request, the foreman consulted with the crew to see if they felt it was safe to move the cars because they'd essentially be putting themselves in harm's way if something went wrong. They accepted anyway. The engineer and trainee hopped onto the 6684, and the conductor and foreman went to the east to the nearest grade crossing and pulled about 50 tankers a quarter-mile west away from the fire. Following that success, 45 minutes later, the assistant fire chief asked if any more tanks could be moved. The crew asked that BNSF trainmaster in the area for permission, who basically told them to be very careful in case the tanks decided to go boom. The trainee left the DPU with the assistant fire chief for round 2, barring the chief's fire protective clothing, standing a mere 10 car lengths from the fire, and they pulled away another 20 tanks. Their heroic actions no doubt saving lives and property alike. Because of the volatile nature of the oil, with pools of it burning and heating the cars like a stove, firefighters decided to let the cars burn themselves out. The fire weakened the steel structure of the tanker cars, leading some to erupt into blevies, short for boiling liquid expanding vapor explosions, sending mushroom clouds of fire and smoke upward that looked like nuclear bombs going off, and creating thermal tears in the tank walls. At 7:11 p.m., the voluntary evacuation order was expanded to encompass the entire town of Castleton due to the winds coming from the west and a weather system that was forcing smoke and the oil downward. A total of about 1,560 people were evacuated from their homes. By the next day, the fire was finally under control, and residents were allowed to return home. 476,000 gallons of crude oil were released from the derailed tanker cars that were punctured from the impact, leaked from damaged bottom valves or broken top fittings, and from those that ruptured during the fire. None of the local townsfolk were injured or killed, and none of the train crew were killed either, although the conductor of the 4934 stated he suffered a back injury from jumping off the power. Still, there was a burning question. What exactly happened? The two trains were on two separate tracks, so how did they collide? Let's focus on the BNSF hopper that fell over on the 6990 West. 486653 was an AAR Type C-114. While research on the specific hopper was unsuccessful, the C-114s were first produced in the early 1990s to replace predecessor hoppers for bulk commodity transport, including grain as in this case, so it's fair to say the hopper was likely manufactured in the early 2000s. Investigators studied the crumpled remains of the car and found everything was fine except for one glaring fault. The number 4 axle on the leading truck of the car was broken in half. The axle in question, an AAR Class K equipped with roller bearings, manufactured in January of 2010 by Standard Steel LLC of Burnham, PA, had fractured at a void lengthwise to the center axis. Tests were conducted at the National Transportation Safety Board's labs, showing voids in the metal and microscopic cracks from metal fatigue and overstress. This led to the axle bending to a point it could potentially derail and cause an accident. Documentation and mechanical maintenance history revealed that the wheel axle assemblies on 2 of the derailed cars from the grain train had been replaced within the previous 4 years, meaning the axle itself was second-hand. Records also showed that the axle bearings and wheels on the broken axle had been installed or remounted in April of 2010 at the BNSF wheel shop in Havelock, Nebraska. The axle was non-destructively tested in accordance with regulations at the time, which required only magnetic particle inspection. These type of tests, though, only reveal cracks and flaws on or near the surface, meaning that it can't reveal voids or other defects that may be present below the surface of the metal, basically just scratching the surface of what could be wrong figuratively and literally. Voids like those found in the broken axle can be found only by a test that detects internal flaws such as ultrasonic inspection. Over time, the axle continued to roll along, deforming in shape, and eventually derailed into the path of the 4934 East. While the cause of the entire mess was just a faulty axle, the story isn't over. When the 6990 West went to emergency, the road foreman tried to warn the 4934 East that they were an emergency.
Train in emergency, 4934, watch yourself.
As anything could have caused that, especially a derailment, and considering what the switch maintainer said about torn switch heater covers, that shredded any doubt. However, the 4934 East crew never heard the warning. According to interviews, after traversing from the Jamestown subdivision onto the KO sub, they had not yet switched their locomotive's radio to the KO subdivision's operating channel of Road Channel 70, or 161.160 MHz. Instead, they were still on the Jamestown sub-frequency of 160.695, or Road Channel 39, as the engineer was attempting to release their track warrant. So they wouldn't be on the same channel as the grain train was at the time of that warning. By the time the engineer saw the hopper sideways in the gauge, it was already too late, because the train needed a good mile to come to a complete stop. In this case, he only had a few yards at best. Regardless, looking back, had it not been for that DPU on the rear of the oil train, nor the actions of both train crews that day, no doubt the accident had the potential to become even worse. Their actions shouldn't be forgotten. The investigation became the National Transportation Safety Board's 4th longest ongoing inquiry, and the longest one not involving an airplane. The reason? According to NTSB spokesman Eric Weiss, we're using the Castleton accident and report as a vehicle to look at other train safety features, such as electronic controlled braking and the difference between the DOT 111s and the CPC 1232 cars. This is a larger issue as opposed to just the investigation of the actual event itself. While electronic braking in the place of air brakes would have done absolutely nothing to change this crash, not to mention they're an overcomplicated, pointless, stupid idea. That still brings us up to our next point. If you've been studying train wrecks involving levees in past accidents, such as Murdoch, Illinois, Crescent City, Illinois, New Brighton, Pennsylvania, etc., you may be familiar with the DOT 111 tank cars. Over the years, they've started to become the highlight of past derailments that led to the release of hazardous materials and explosions. On top of the previous derailments, on July 6, 2013, mere months before the Casselton collision, a Maine, Montreal, and Atlantic crude oil train ran away downgrade after losing its air and derailed in the center of a suburb in Quebec in Lac-Mégantic. The resulting fire and explosion killed over 47 people, nearly wiping the entire town out. Just like in Lac-Mégantic, the train consisted of DOT 111 tank cars. These tankers had a high tendency to stand up poorly in collisions and breach open from derailments, suffer thermal tears and intense heat, or worse, explode with tremendous force. This was no different in Castleton. Neither the DOT 111 tank cars nor the similar CPC 1232 cars required to be equipped with thermal protection systems to protect the tanks from exposure from such pool or torch fire conditions that can occur in accidents. When a bare steel tank car filled with flammable liquid is exposed to that, the internal pressure of the tank builds, degrading the strength of the tank walls, and the flammable liquid can reach a temperature beyond its boiling point before... yeah, that. The NTSB issued their final report of the accident on February 7th, 2017. It listed the probable cause was a broken axle on the 45th car of the grain train caused by an internal void that was created during axle manufacture. Contributing to the accident was inadequate interchange rules used to locate internal material defects in secondhand use axles. The severity of the accident was increased by the pooling of a highly flammable liquid that resulted in a fire and caused additional cars to fail. The 0-degree weather and snow did in theory help reduce the severity of the accident by a small percentage, although this wasn't stated in the final report of the accident. It did, however, help out in another crash in Waiwega, Wisconsin. A few of the derailed hoppers and most of the derailed tank cars were scrapped. The oil train's head-end power was practically burnt to a crisp, with both being scrapped on site, while the undamaged DPU and the grain train's power still see service on BNSF today. Following the crash, a recall was issued for the axles made in the same 2002 batch by Standard Steel LLC for inspection and replacement. 43 of them in total. The NTSB recommended studies be conducted to evaluate risk posed to train crews by hazardous material transport by rail, determine the adequate separation distance between hazardous materials and locomotives, as well as occupied equipment that ensures the protection of train crews during both normal operations and accident conditions. The NTSB, along with Transport Canada, thanks to Lac-Mégantic, announced the new DOT 117 specification to supersede the DOT 111 design for all flammable class products, of which all cars were to be retired or rebuilt by May 2025. Sadly, that would be too late to prevent the most infamous train wreck of the 21st century in East Palestine, Ohio, when a multitude of failures and negligence led to a Norfolk Southern manifest derailing from a hotbox on a hopper's axle, leading to DOT 111 tank cars being punctured, releasing flammable liquids, and a reckless, unnecessary vent and burn to poison thousands of locals. BNSF did take many steps to prevent this from happening again, with the start of radial ultrasonic testing of all secondhand axles at its Havelock wheel shop being one of them. The engineer and conductor of 4934 East both filed lawsuits against Standard Steel LLC and BNSF, stating that their negligence caused the accident, their post-traumatic stress disorders, and leading the engineer to end his career on the rails. According to court documents, both cases appear to have reached settlements by 2016, but very little info is available to the public. 12 years have passed, and the legacy of this crash is still fresh in people's minds. And after the East Palestine accident, it makes you wonder. Thanks to the negligent business practices of precision scheduled railroading, or PSR for short, the potential for a repeat incident is surely there. Trains have been getting longer and heavier to satisfy the needs for CEOs of Class 1s to trade more profit over safety and to obtain more shareholders, while more and more car inspectors of Class 1 railroads get laid off or penalized for doing their job, finding defects in huge cuts of cars with an impossible time frame to do it properly, even with overtime and all that. Such elements are thankfully absent on smaller railroads, especially regionals and short lines, who tend to prioritize safety over everything else.